morning. I wanted to make a longer video on this because I just made a shorter video, and it's an interesting two stories here, and it looks like it could have some connections to it, really. In Genesis 22, Abraham is told to go offer Isaac, and Abraham was promised a seed, right, and that the Messiah would eventually come through that seed, right? On down through his through Sarah, Abraham and Sarah, and you get Isaac, Jacob, and on down. Messiah would eventually come through that line. So when Abraham's told to offer Isaac, it's like, well, what's going on here? I mean, Sarah was already really old, so was Abraham. So if you're gonna, if you're gonna if he's going to be an offering, what's where's his seed going to come from? So it's kind of interesting already. But Abraham does it anyway because Abraham has great faith. But anyway, he gets there and he's about to offer Isaac on Mount Moriah, and God says, "No, don't do that. Stop. I've seen that I've basically seen your faith. Don't do it." And then in verse 13, Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham took the ram, offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. So this ram, God provides this ram with two horns as a burnt offering. Basically burn it alive. I think that's how the burnt offering was done, and that's going to be the replacement for Isaac. Isaac gets spared. This ram gets sacrificed. So that's just interesting. And then I also saw it was I believe it was on let's see. Yeah, on the third on verse 4 of chapter 22 of Genesis. It was on the third day. So it was like a 3-day journey. Abraham lifted up his eyes, saw the place far off. So it took him 3 days, but he gets there. Um, so yeah, there's that from Genesis 22. And there may be more connections. I'll have to kind of look further into it. I'm just making a short video on this right now because I was just reading Genesis 22 this morning, and it just, it came to my mind. Like, I've seen a ram with two horns before in Daniel. So anyway, so we saw that it was the third day or 3-day journey, but you get to Daniel 8, and it's in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. A vision appeared unto Daniel, and he's in Shushan in the province of Elam. Well, that's and then he has a vision of a ram with two horns. So that's interesting, right? Third year, 3-day journey, kind of connections there with the threes. He's in Elam, which is modern day part of Iran. So this ram with two horns represents Medo-Persian Empire ram with two horns. Well, the ram with two horns was a burnt offering and replacement of Isaac. So there's a couple connections there. Well, this ram with two horns says he was pushing westward, northward, southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. So this ram with two horns was becoming really great. Big tough guy. But then this he goat in verse 5 comes and smashes him, comes and destroys him. That's Alexander the Great that does that. So this ram with two horns kind of becomes a burnt offering almost, right? You got the third year, 3 day journey. Ram with two horns becomes the sacrifice. And so you get, so now you're in chapter 8 of Daniel, and it's basically saying, hey, this is a vision for something that happened back then, but it's also a vision of the end times. And so it goes on to say basically there comes a little horn out of a broken up the broken up Grecian Empire of Alexander the Great, and a bad guy comes out of that. But what it really points to overall, when you get later on into uh, chapter 9, it's the 70 weeks are determined for thy people prophecy. Because Daniel basically goes into prayers and confession and fasting in chapter 9, and God says 70 weeks are determined. Well, 69 of those weeks have already happened, so that last week or last 7 years is what's to come. And like it says in verse 27, he shall confirm the covenant with the many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifices and oblation to cease. So it's that last week, there's this bad guy that's going to show up, but I think like what happened with the ram with two horns, the goat smashes that, right? And so that's that's probably a picture of the Messiah that's going to come back at the end of the last week, at the end of that last 70 years, and smash all their enemies, uh, of Israel, and set up the kingdom, the Messianic kingdom. So it's a very interesting connection that I never had seen before, but I think there's definitely something to that. There's probably even more connections. But what I think is that it represents the start of the 70th week. When that ram with two horns gets smashed, I think that's picturing, hey, this is um, it's a good thing, but as we've seen before, like just because it got smashed doesn't mean it's all over with quite yet, because um, Alexander the Great did it, and I think he was a kind of an ally of Israel, and an instrument that God used to crush Iran. But then that was broken up into four uh, notable horns, and one of them was Antiochus Epiphanes, and he wasn't so good. He did some really horrible things, but he was a picture of the type of the false Messiah, a guy that was really, well, his name was Antiochus Epiphanes, and Epiphanes meant something like he thought he was God. He was crazy. He was a lunatic. But you know, so yeah, I'll have to read more into that. But I just thought, the ram with two horns, ram with two horns, uh, kind of an interesting connection there. And yeah, I think just in this, in Genesis 22, also, it points to the Messiah. It points to God being in charge. So it also just shows that God's still in control, and he's going to offer the sacrifice and basically bring about the redemption. So I'll look further into that, but just thought I would bring that to you all. See what you guys think. Um, Interesting stories. Thank you for watching.